Alright, I get it. You're tired of hearing this critique, you're tired of seeing this review, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I want to give my input on it. If it wasn't obvious, I am a huge Dark Souls fan. Some of my best performing and favorite videos on my channel are Dark Souls related. I highly suggest you check them out when you're done with this video. So, let's get on with the point. I'm sure everyone knows that Dark Souls 2 is the most divided Souls game out of any of them. Practically all Souls games are considered masterpieces across the board, yet this one is kind of just a black sheep in the series. There are plenty of videos on the internet discussing Dark Souls 2, but they're all vastly different from one another. Some people will defend Dark Souls for hours on end, and others will beat it like a dead horse for being a bad game. Never have I seen a game so divided in terms of loving it and hating it. Presently, it is more common for a game to just be considered amazing or meh, really no in between. I think the last time I saw a game's relationship with its players be so divided is Deadly Premonition. You know, that clunky mess of a PS3 game that made absolutely no sense and was one of the worst looking games on the console, but yet it was super charming. I'm not saying this game is bad at all. I find the game to be quite charming with all its jank. I played Deadly Premonition years ago and I remember loving everything about the game. It was so weird and it had amazing B-roll horror that I just couldn't put down. However, the game is very divided in the horror community, which is why I am comparing it to Dark Souls 2. The game got okay reviews, but the community either praised it for how peculiar and strange it is, despite the jank, or ripped it to pieces. Dark Souls 2 is in kind of a similar situation. People either love the game or view it as one of the worst games ever, and then there's the people that just go, yeah, it's a Souls game for sure. But now, commonly, I think people are starting to realize that Dark Souls 2 isn't that bad, but I've always had this gravitation towards it. Sure, it isn't the most polished game in the series, but I feel like that is part of what makes the game so unique compared to other games. See, for those of you who don't know, the From Software team was split up to work on two games. Team A would work on Bloodborne, and Team B, led by Tomohiro Shibuya, I think, would work on Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2 having a different developer meant that it would be different from Demon's Souls and Dark Souls 1. A lot of what people consider bad in Dark Souls 2 largely comes from the fact that the developer wanted to try something new. Whether or not the mechanic didn't make much sense, I don't know. But that's right, I'm going to talk about ADP, the number one argument for Dark Souls 2 haters. ADP is a very interesting case to me. It's basically a stat for your iframes, how fast you can heal, and from what I know, that's it. Practically everyone in the community hates this stat because there's no point to it, it's just a gimmick that isn't utilized fully. I, on the other hand, think it's kind of genius, just not executed properly at all. The idea of having stat that somewhat increases your invincibility is pretty cool, and the fact that it helps you heal faster, albeit slightly, is a really neat feature. I think if they tweaked the mechanics of the stat, it would be really cool, and I think people would not complain about it nearly as much as they do. However, I still think people complain about it way too much. See, Dark Souls 2 has this weird leveling system. It requires almost no souls to level up, so you can get any stat upgraded to like 40 as early as you want if you take the right route. This is something you could never do in the previous Souls games, and I think if ADP was in a different Souls game, it would be much worse. You need like 25 ADP to get through the game, and just by beating the Dragon Rider, you can get to that number pretty much instantly. It isn't hard enough to get ADP, yet the community acts like it's hell. I get it, you could put those stats into something arguably more important, but it really isn't that bad. Those extra points of vigor and vitality you might need will come to you once you defeat the next boss. Now, this doesn't excuse ADP being a bad mechanic. I just personally think it's not that bad, and it's just not, the worst thing ever. But, of course, there is the argument that a new player won't know what ADP does, which is a completely valid argument. A new player should not be handicapped by this game's obscure and almost unnecessary mechanic. So I don't really have any arguments against that. Overall, ADP probably shouldn't be a thing, but I think if they tried to tweak it and made like a full-on Dark Souls 2 remaster, I don't know, like 5-10 years down the line, it could be amazing. There are other mechanics that the game introduced which are questionable, such as Halloween. Whenever you die, your health decreases by a slight margin, so it's kind of like a lesser curse from Dark Souls 1. If you keep dying and dying, which you will, Dark Souls is all about dying and learning after all, this can be detrimental and downright infuriating to new players. There are items to remedy this, such as human effigies, which turn you back into human, and the Ring of Binding, which decreases the amount of health lost while you are hollow. But what if you run out of effigies to restore yourself to human form? It is impossible to use all of the human effigies provided to you. There are even tricks to get infinite amounts of them, so it's basically impossible to softlock your character into having so little health. If you do softlock your character, I mean, congratulations. That is very impressive. I don't know how. I still think the mechanic isn't great, though, because it can punish new players very early on and cause them to even quit the game before they get a chance to properly experience it. I believe what they were trying to do is bring back the health loss. What the fuck am I saying? The health loss mechanic from Demon Souls, but it wasn't really done correctly. They made it more gradual rather than instant, but as a result, you get the same effect in Demon Souls, where Demon Souls was more hard on new players, deeming the game as too hard and purposely out to get you. I think the hollowing mechanic makes a lot of sense. I think it is a very cool concept too. The more hollow you become, the weaker you get. It makes sense. I think it is a perfect mechanic from a character design standpoint, but the mechanic itself just feels like a handicap that does not need to be there. If there's one game in the franchise that did this perfectly, it would have been Dark Souls 3 with its Embers. Embers are basically glorified divine blessings that also increase your health. This is genius. I wish Dark Souls 2 would have had a mechanic like this instead of hollowing. But it is more of a nitpick on my end than anything. Hollowing doesn't really bother me. I'd say the only other weird mechanic they added is the Fragrant Branch of Your item. Throughout Drangleic, there are these NPCs or enemies encased in stone, which you need to free in order to progress through the game or to unlock certain things. I think in theory, once again, this mechanic can be cool. However, there are seemingly no failsafes. If you use a Fragrant Branch of Your at the wrong place at the wrong time, I'm sure you can actually hardlock your game from progressing, which makes this mechanic abysmal, especially for new players, because there are some enemies in stone that just don't do anything, so you can easily waste one. I think From Software should have completely gotten rid of this in Scholar the First Sin, because it provides nothing to the overall experience, and it's just there to annoy the living hell out of you and cause anxiety in your playthrough. How about we talk about some mechanics that I like now? I am a huge fan of life gems. I know life gems are either a you love them or you hate them edition in Dark Souls 2, but I personally love them. However, I do think there's a huge problem with them. The fact they're infinite. Life gems make the game way too easy. You basically have an infinite heal button, which no game should ever have. Life gems heal the player 500 HP per 11 seconds. Okay, not bad. But they stack upon each use. So if you use 4, you can get your whole health bar back in like 5 seconds. They're also much quicker than an Estus, so they basically make Estus one of the core components of Dark Souls useless. On top of that all, life gems can tank through enemy damage, negating their efforts completely. So I do think the item is overpowered, but I do really like it, and I really like the concept behind it. I think they could have just managed it a bit better. I think From Software should have made life gems a more valuable resource, which they did with the more potent variants, but the more potent variants are arguably worse than the standard life gems, because you can't really stack them easier. But the mechanic I wish they would have brought into Dark Souls 3 the most would have had to be bonfire aesthetics. These are genius. Being able to put any area you want in New Game Plus is such a good mechanic. I can't stress it enough, especially since Dark Souls 2 arguably has the best new game in the whole franchise. It makes this item even better. You can fight bosses multiple times for their souls / weapons / spells, extra levels, and get items exclusive to New Game Plus. This idea is amazing, and I feel like so many other Souls players would want a variant of this item to come back eventually. The other use of bonfire statics would be the Dark Souls 2's weird mechanic of enemies not spawning. After you kill them a certain amount of times, they just despawn. They don't spawn anymore. This mechanic honestly doesn't change much because Dark Souls 2 has awful runbacks, and you'll most likely be running past all of the enemies in Dark Souls 2 anyway. And if you didn't, it's too time consuming to kill everything like 20 times to get them to despawn. Like, come on. And I wouldn't be surprised if some people didn't really know about it. Dark Souls 2, of course, added dual stancing, but I haven't really used it that much, and I doubt I ever will. If there is one more mechanic I wish was fully utilized, it would have been the Giant Dreams. The Giant Dreams are very interesting, a very interesting way to tell the story of Drangleic and Dark Souls 2, but it felt largely underwhelming to me. This does make sense because for those who don't know, Dark Souls 2 had the most potential of any Souls game, yet almost everything was scrapped because they had too many ideas and too little time. Dark Souls 2 could have easily been the best and most unique Souls game of our time, but unfortunately we don't live in that timeline. The game has so much potential, and it really does piss me off a bit that we don't get a full proper Dark Souls 2 experience. Now that I am done talking about some of the core mechanics of Dark Souls 2, it's time to discuss more of the game itself. This game is pretty disconnected from Dark Souls 1. There are some connections through lore, especially from Manus and the Abyss, but most of the lore and storytelling is completely original and disconnected from the first game, if I am correct. I'm not the Dark Souls lore enthusiast, so don't take my word for this. But I actually quite like this. I think it gives Dark Souls 2 this completely different vibe from the rest of the series, even if the vibe is a redheaded stepchild that gets bullied for not being like all the other kids. Drangleic is still arguably one of my favorite worlds in the Souls franchise. Sure, I love the gloom and despair of Lordran, and I love the fading hope of Lothric, but there is something just so special about Dark Souls 2's world. I don't care if certain things about it don't make any sense, like how an elevator takes you to the fortress of lava, presumably in the sky. Sure, you can argue it breaks immersion, but it has never bothered me. You can also say that the world of Dark Souls 2 feels disconnected from everything. Something that made Dark Souls 2 so special to people was how everything intertwined it seamlessly. Nearly every area would connect to another through a shortcut, and it did make you feel more connected to the world of Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 1, I will admit. While Dark Souls 2 doesn't have the same level of complexity that Dark Souls 1 has, I still think it does a good job with connecting its world. Similar to Firelink Shrine, Majula feels like a hub area that leads you to everything. It takes you to the Gutter, which leads you to Black Gulch. It takes you to Heights Tower Flame, which can take you to the Lost Bastille early. It leads you to Forest of the Fallen Giants, which also transports you to Lost Bastille. And there is, of course, the Shaded Woods, which takes you to Drangleic. I love how Drangleic is actually so close to the hub area. Majula is a beautiful and serene place, no doubt about it. And I think having all of these drab, dreadful areas connected to it perfectly juxtaposes Majula. And yes, I don't care how the moment you step into Drangleic it starts raining, despite it being clear moments ago. I love rain. Rain makes me happy. It doesn't bother me. And give me as much hate as you want, but I think Dark Souls 2 looks beautiful. Yes, I wish it looked like that one tech demo they showed off. Hell, everyone wishes Dark Souls 2 ended up how it was supposed to be, but the game still looks stunning in its own right. The graphics are certainly different, but I think most areas are gorgeous. Majula is the perfect safe space in this cruel world. I could listen to the waves roar for hours if I lived there. Dragon Aerie, a beautiful structure infested with dragons. The Lost Bastille has this gorgeous midnight chain with the moon gleaming in the sky. And as much as I hate the Shrine of Amana, the fluorescent flowers and everything that isn't horribly designed enemies and instant death pits are absolutely breathtaking. Dark Souls 2 is beautiful from a design and a visual standpoint. But what about the quality of the areas in gameplay itself? I think Dark Souls 2 has better areas than Dark Souls 1. There. I said it, and I'm not at all afraid to say it. I even think Dark Souls 2 has better gameplay than Dark Souls 1. I know this is a very controversial take, but I don't care. You know me. I'm about controversial takes. I don't like Bloodborne. I think Dark Souls 2 is beautiful in its own right, but if you ask me, Dark Souls 2 is just better. I hate going through Dark Souls 1 each time because every area, in my opinion, is just a slog to go through. It's not that the areas are particularly hard, they're just kind of annoying every now and then, and I just can't bring myself to enjoy them ever. Sure, Dark Souls 2 has its stinkers, and a lot of areas can just be okay, nothing more than that. The Gutter, Black Gulch, Shrine of Amana are no doubt awful areas, and of course there are the wretched areas in the Dark Souls 2 DLC, but that's all people ever focus on. Whenever people bring up Dark Souls 2, whether it's areas, the gameplay, or anything else, people never talk about what it did well, I feel like. It's always Dark Souls 2 is bad because it did insert this that Dark Souls 1 didn't do. I feel like a lot of the community just wanted Dark Souls 2 to be more of Dark Souls 1, and I can't blame them. Dark Souls 1 is evolutionary. But then Dark Souls 3, which was more of Dark Souls 1 plus Bloodborne, people started to complain that the game was piggybacking off of Dark Souls 1 too much. It's like a constant battle that each Souls game, especially Dark Souls 2, cannot win, and I feel bad for it. If I had to compete against the absolute behemoths that were DS1 and Bloodborne, but while still successful, DS2 got shafted away. I agree that Bloodborne has better bosses over DS2, and same for DS1, even though I don't like both of them as much as other players. I think DS1 and DS2 boss quality are rather equal, though I do think DS1 has some better bosses. DS2 bosses are just another complaint in the community, and this one I can somewhat agree with. Most of them are just dudes in armor, and one isn't even just Ornstein. I do like some of the gimmick bosses like Executioner's Chariot, and Looking Glass Knight is my favorite Dark Souls 2 boss, but I must agree that the bosses in this game are rather meh. I don't think they're absolute hot garbage like some people on the internet say. I just think they are okay for the most part. I just think Dark Souls 2 gets compared too much to the other games in the franchise, and people don't appreciate it for what it is trying to be. It is purposely trying to be different. Whether you think it is better or worse, everything about it is nothing like the other games, and that is what I love so much about it. It's so weird and out there. I think it is refreshing. I do think it has its fair share of problems. Every game does. Dark Souls 2 has the huge problem of artificial difficulty. Rather than making it difficult by including enemies that require strategy to kill, they add a ton of enemies in one cramped room that do way too much damage, while the areas in the game are super fun to go through. Some of them are just downright unenjoyable. And some bosses do genuinely just suck. One could argue that the leveling system of the game makes it too easy, and you're right, but I think it's okay. Leveling up easily means you can experiment and make your build however you want. You can make a hybrid build. My favorite build I've ever made in Dark Souls 2 and the Soul series in general was a Strength and Miracle user that absolutely wiped the floor with bosses. Another thing I love is the weapon variety. Sure, it's no Elden Ring, but Dark Souls 2 has some really fun weapons to use, especially the boss weapons. The Drakewing Ultra Great Sword is one of the coolest and most underrated Souls series swords in my humble opinion. The sword looks so cool, and it's absolutely overpowered with the right setup. Seriously, try this thing yourself in your next Dark Souls 2 playthrough. You will not regret it. There's just so many things that Dark Souls 2 does way better than people might not think, and I'm tired of pretending that it doesn't. I understand why people might hate this game. It definitely isn't for everyone, but I highly suggest giving it another chance with an open mind. Yes, the game is undoubtedly clunky. The bosses could be better. Combat can be very slow and weird. The game can be infuriating for the wrong reasons. And the game ends rather disappointingly. But if you can look all past that, put biases aside, and not compare the game to anything else, I think Dark Souls 2 is a diamond in the rough and can appeal to anyone in any way. Even though this review sounds very negative, This is one of my favorite Souls games. I love Dark Souls 2, and I know it doesn't sound like it. But seriously, I do deep down enjoy this game. And I hope you guys enjoy it too. Thank you all for watching this video. This video has been my favorite to write to date, and I hope you guys had as much fun watching this as I did making it. Of course, if you like the video, why not subscribe, like it, share it, comment. It helps out a ton, and it motivates me to make more videos just like this one. Once again, thank you, I appreciate it all, and goodbye.